In this section, we're factoring out what's called a greatest common factor. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this GCF for short. Greatest common factor is basically the biggest thing that will divide into each term of a polynomial. And we'll just jump in and get started. The first one that I want to do, the first polynomial factor is x squared plus 6x. Now the way that you identify GCF is you look first off at the coefficients. The coefficients here are 1 and 6, okay? So there's nothing besides 1 that will go into either of those, so for now we won't consider that to be a GCF. The second thing you look at is the letters, x squared and 6x. If there is a common letter, then that letter that is common is considered to be a factor or a common factor. Now the way you do this is if there's a common letter, you write the letter and then you write the smallest exponent that you see in the original form. 2 and 1 are your exponents, and therefore x to the 1 will be your GCF. So your GCF here is x. Now what I do is I open up a parentheses next to the x, and then I see what would happen if I took an x out of each term or divided x out of each term. X squared over x would be just x, and 6x over x would just be 6. And that's what it looks like when you factor out a GCF. It's almost like reverse distributive. You don't have to write this, but I'm just telling you what it's going to look like after you're finished. It looks like a reverse distributive property, because when you distribute, you start off with a problem that looks like this, and then you distribute to go back to this. So you can see, if this is your first time factoring, that factoring is basically the opposite of polynomial multiplication, because this is a multiplication problem here, and you go back to here when you multiply. This right here is a factoring problem, and you go back to here when you factor. So that's what I mean when I say that they're opposites. So that's sort of an introduction to what factoring is, and as well as an example of taking out GCF. Let's go to number 2 now. You have 6x cubed plus 15x squared. And again, anytime you want to pause the video, just pause it and work it yourself if you want to, and then you can come back and check it and watch me work it out. But on this one, the GCF will be 3, okay, because 3 is the biggest thing that goes into 6 and 15. And you'll also notice again there's a common x, and this time the smallest exponent is 2. So 3x squared is your GCF. Notice I'm going ahead and writing it underneath, and I'm also going to write it over here and open up a parentheses next to it. And again, to figure out what goes in the parentheses, you just divide here and here. The first one will be 2x, and the second one will be 5. So that right there is your final answer, your factorization. Number 3, you have 32x to the 4th plus 2x cubed plus 8x squared. And I'm probably going to run out of room here, but we'll try to squeeze it in. GCF here is going to be 2x squared. Sorry about that, that's a 2 right there. We're going to take out the 2x squared, and I'm going to have to find somewhere to write this. So why don't I sneak it up here and say 2x squared parentheses. It's going to be 16x squared plus x plus 4. And again, where did those come from? 16x squared came from that, x came from that, 4 came from that right there. Sorry again about the writing, it's a little bit sloppy. But anyway, hopefully you can still read it. So let's look at maybe a couple more. Number 4. You have 27x squared y cubed minus 18xy squared. plus 45x squared y. Look at your coefficients, 27, 18, 45. What is the GCF for those three? It would be 9. Common letters, you can see a common x here. You can also see a common y, and for the y's and the x's both, the smallest exponent would be 1, so that means your GCF is 9xy. I'll come underneath here this time and write it so I'll have room. So write 9xy on the outside of the parentheses. That will give you 3xy squared when you divide. Divide that will give you minus 2y. Divide that, give you plus 5x. And that would be your result on that one. Finally, we get to negative 8x to the fourth plus 32x cubed plus 16x squared. Now the reason I want to do this is to show you that if your polynomial starts with a negative, what you want to do is factor out a negative. And the fact is, you could factor out a negative anytime you want to, but it's only appropriate to do so when the polynomial starts off with a negative. So once again, right here, if there's a negative, you make your GCF negative. So, in deciding what the GCF is going to be, we look at 8, 32, and 16, and we decide it's going to be 8. And again, we've already decided as well that it's going to be negative. You can see also that there is a common x here, and the smallest exponent will be 2. And writing this out, we'll say negative 8x squared times positive, be careful with signs here, x squared minus 4x minus 2. And that would be your final answer on that. Last one, 6x plus 18. GCF here is 6. And the reason I wanted to do this, by the way, this very last one, is because so far I believe every one we've done has had a common letter, and it's not a rule that they have to have a common letter, so make sure before you decide to take a letter out that it is common. X is not common here because the 18 does not have an X on it, so therefore you can't take an X out. So right here your GCF is just 6, and so we take the 6 out, and that leaves you with X plus 3 as your answer. And that's all. Let me know if you have any questions.